University, staying in the education business. Johnson has programs now in Louisville and in Indianapolis, and I teach in those programs and direct those programs. And so again, I can tell you more about that over lunch if you like. I keep thinking about this church supper. I always love church suppers. So I'm going to talk about a church supper, sort of, today. I'm going to talk about a dinner party, but it's a very unusual dinner party. Let's start by who was there. Now, Jesus is at this dinner party. That's not surprising in and of itself because Jesus often went to dinner parties. When he was invited, he would go. But this time, death is very close. He's so close to death, he can see its ugly face. The cross is only a week away. But Jesus hides his sorrows, and he goes to this supper. Now, the host is interesting. His name is Simon, but he has a nickname. Simon the leper. That's interesting. Normally, we wouldn't want to go to dinner with a leper. Wouldn't be the most appetizing dinner company to have. In fact, it would have been kind of illegal. He must have been a leper who was healed. Maybe he was one of the lepers Jesus healed, and now he's inviting Jesus to come to his dinner table. That's a possibility. The apostles were all there. Peter, Andrew, James, John, Judas, and the rest. Lazarus is there, according to the text. Lazarus was there. The man Jesus raised from the dead. What must that dinner conversation have been like? Did you see the light, Lazarus? Did you see the light? What was heaven like? Do you remember any of it? What can you tell us? Now, Lazarus was a member of a family that was very close to Jesus, so his sister Martha was there. And Martha was at her accustomed place, doing what she always does, helping, serving in the kitchen, making the dinner, all of that. She must have been a friend or a relative of Simon. That means if Lazarus and Martha was there, there's Mary. There's Mary. Now, she comes in at the end of the dinner. She's not supposed to be there. By the custom of the time, the men and women would have separated, but she was always breaking convention. Remember, at her own house, Martha was cleaning up dinner, and Mary comes in to listen to the teachings of Jesus, and Martha says, come on, make her come back and help me. And Jesus said, oh, she's chosen the better thing. So she was always doing this kind of thing, and here she does it again. She's always at the feet of Jesus, either listening to him teach or worshiping him. In this case, she's not coming to hear him teach. She is coming with something in her hands. An alabaster box, and in that, some precious ointment. And there, she comes to the feet of Jesus to anoint his feet. It wasn't terribly unusual in those days to have people anoint feet. It was kind of a custom in that time, but the way she does it, the extravagance of it all. What she did there, however, brought more frowns than it did smiles. It brought more criticism than it did praise. So let me read for you from John's account of this. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus arrived at Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table. Then Mary took a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. I guess that was strong perfume. And it's an interesting detail that the house was filled with the fragrance. I'm reminded of when I was in church camp and the dorm being filled with the fragrance of brute aftershave. Well, except this is probably more pleasant than that, right? But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. That's a lot of money, a year's wages. How did Mary have something like this? Well, in those days, often you would get this kind of thing as a gift when you were born, and you would keep it your whole life, and then it would be used to anoint you at your burial. Remember, Jesus was given gold, frankincense, and myrrh when he was born. A year's wages. All right. But Judas did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief, a keeper of the money bag. He used to help himself to what was put into it. Leave her alone, Jesus replied. It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you'll not always have me. So Jesus commends her act. And we assume now, because Jesus was the Son of God, that he was justified in that. But if we'd been the apostles, if we'd been Judas, maybe we would have found something wrong with it. I mean, I have to admit, I might have been a little bit on Judas' side. I was saying, a year's wages, that's an awful lot. Just to throw it out here and waste it in one act here at dinner? It appears that the rest of the disciples kind of chimed in with Judas, but Judas was the instigator. But this is extravagant love in action. She was doing something beautiful, Jesus said. So let's consider today, what was it that was beautiful about what she did? First thing I want to tell you about her gift was that it's a very sincere gift. Now, I will say that there are times we can be sincerely wrong about something. However, that doesn't mean that sincerity is of no value at all. There is something about sincerity that is commended by Jesus. So we don't want to devalue it. Any deed that we do to glorify Christ is in some sense beautiful. Now, we're getting ready to face in a few weeks the Christmas season. And when I was thinking about this, I thought about a famous Christmas story written by O. Henry. Perhaps you read it or have seen it dramatized. It's called The Gift of the Magi. It's the story of Jim and Della, a poor young couple that live in a very small apartment in New York City. And Christmas is coming and they don't have enough money for presents. And so after Jim goes off to work, Della begins to scheme how she could find enough money to get a nice present for her husband. She thinks about one of his prized possessions is a pocket watch that his father had given him. And so she decides, I've got to find enough money maybe to buy a watch chain for his pocket watch. She has no assets except one thing that people value. In those days, they valued her very, very long hair. And so she goes down to a place where they do such things, and they cut off her hair to make a wig out of it, and she gets enough money to buy a watch chain. And she goes home. She's a little bit worried. She's proud of the present she's bought, but on the other hand, she wonders what Jim will think of her when he sees her with the hair all cut off. Time comes, and Jim comes home from work, and he comes in, and he's immediately astonished by the look. And she tells him, oh, please, don't be upset. Don't be upset with me. It'll all be okay, Jim. I did it to buy something for you. And he's a little bit concerned about all this for a good reason. He says, well, I bought something for you too. And he brings out these beautiful combs, decorative combs that sometimes ladies would put in their hair back then. But now she doesn't have enough hair to hold the combs. But she says, it's still all right, Jim. I love the gift. It's all going to be worth it. Here's what I gave you. And she brings out the gift. He opens it. And there is the beautiful chain for his pocket watch. And Jim just starts laughing. She doesn't understand it. And she says, what's the matter, Jim? Put it on your watch. He said, I sold the watch so that I could buy the combs for your hair. Now, in some ways, that seems like a tragic story, and yet every year at Christmas it kind of gets to us. And you know what O. Henry said at the end? He talked about the fact that in the first Christmas they were magi, wise men. And then he says at the end of the story about Jim and Della, of all who give gifts, he said, these are the wisest. These are the magi. So we understand that a gift given with sincerity should always be appreciated. And Mary was no doubt sincere in giving probably the most valuable thing she had to Jesus, which is the second thing that makes it beautiful. It was a costly gift. There was a young high school student one time who had a girlfriend, and he bought her a present, and he wrote on the note, with all my love and most of my allowance. Well, in this case, it was more than most of her allowance. It was everything she had. That's a costly gift. There was a man who was shopping for a Valentine's Day gift for his wife, and he passed the cosmetics counter, and it occurred to him that perfume would be the perfect gift. So he asked the sales representative to show him some of the popular brands. First bottle she brought out was $150. He said, that's a bit much. Do you have anything a little less expensive? So she brought another brand, $130. He said, that's still quite a bit. Do you have anything cheaper? So the sales representative brought out an armful of bottles ranging from $80 down to $18. She placed them in front of the husband. And he finally picked up the $18 bottle and he pushed it aside and said, it's still too much. What I mean is, I'd really like to see something cheap. So the sales representative handed him a mirror so he could see something cheap. Actually, a friend of mine actually tried an experiment to determine this idea of this expensive gift of perfume. And so he was a minister, so he was doing some research, and he went to a well-known department store, and he asked to see the most expensive bottle of perfume. He could see the clerk's happiness, no doubt, thinking she was going to make a big sale. He noticed her whispering to the other clerks. How disappointed they all were when they found out he was just a preacher doing research. But he reported after looking at all this, there was no perfume at that high-class store that was worth a year's wages. That's how big this gift was. This is what my friend wrote about this. He said the perfume Mary poured upon the feet of Jesus was worth a year's wages. Suppose your boss gave you a bonus equal to a year's wages. What would you do with it? Pay some bills? Give some away? Buy a new car? Invest in stocks and bonds? Would you pour it out at the feet of Jesus? Would you invest it in the kingdom of God? You're beginning to understand the extravagance of Mary's deed. No wonder Jesus said that her gift would be remembered for centuries. Clovis Chappell said one time, love will do the big thing if it can. If it cannot, it will do a small thing in a big way. And it's within the reach of all of us, perhaps, to do a small thing in a big way. So, the gift was sincere and costly, but it's also a humble gift. There is nothing more humble than washing feet. It was the work of the lowest servant. Remember when Jesus and his disciples come in the upper room, they're kind of looking around. Who's going to do the foot washing? And of all people, Jesus did the foot washing. I was at church camp one time, and at this particular week in church camp, they were talking about foot washing, and the dean of the week of camp said, now, we don't wash feet today, so we're not going to do a foot washing service, but think about something that to you is as humble as that, and maybe do that sometime this week. It turned out to be a wonderful week of camp. I remember I went to the shower, came back to the dorm, and someone had made my bed. Something else had happened that struck us. They had this big movie screen at this church camp. And I guess through the years of showing movies at night, outdoors, lots of bugs had been attracted to that big screen. And when you pulled down the screen, you'd see all the remains of the bugs all over. Kind of looked like a hairy kind of screen there. And it was really gross. One time, after this challenge was made, the dean pulls down the screen, and that screen was crystal clean. It was beautiful. Somebody had taken the time to come in and clean off all those bug remains off of the screen. So it doesn't have to be washing feet, mind you, but in this case, it was something that was done regularly, but Mary took it the next level up and washed feet. I was at a church many years ago where I was preaching on the subject of Jesus washing his disciples' feet, and they thought, should we have a foot washing service? And people said, new Christians that we're, trying to attract, seekers, are going to be a little scared by this. So what they did instead was they did a demonstration of a foot washing. So we had a few people that had their feet washed by the elders of the church, and then we interviewed each one. And boy, they said it's so hard to receive it. It's as hard to receive it as it is to give it. But here we see Jesus receiving it and praising her because of its expression of extravagant love. It's a humble thing to wash feet. Today, it's one of the last things we want to do. C.S. Lewis once wrote an essay on church music. He discussed the relative worth of the gifts we give Jesus, but he concluded with words that apply to what we're talking about today. He said, for all our gifts, whether of music or even of martyrdom, they're all intrinsically worthless gifts of a child, which the Father values, but values for the intent. So yes, we can praise the fact this was a costly gift. But what we look beyond is not just how much money it cost, but the intent of the giver. And to give something that was precious to her. Now, it doesn't mean that the gifts we give have to be very expensive ones. They could be, but they don't have to be. I told you earlier that Rosemary and I have become grandparents. Our daughter had twins, a boy and a girl, and then they had a surprise baby later. So I refer to them as the pair and the spare. the poor, they weren't supposed to have that other one, but that other baby came. And so they had the twins, and then they had another baby not long after that. But I particularly remember an incident that happened with the twin granddaughter. Her name is Maddie. And my wife and I were coming back from vacation, and as grandparents are wont to do, we bought them some inexpensive gifts to come back from vacation, say we bought you this while we were on our trip. And we bought not very expensive gifts, but they were kind of cool looking gifts that kids would like. And so when we got to see them, we handed out the gifts. And not long after I gave Maddie her gift, I hear her run off into another room, and I hear her rummaging around in her stuff. She's about 2 years old at the time, just barely talking. And her nickname for me is Papa. She called me Papa. So after I hear her rummaging around for a while, she runs into the room saying, Papa, Papa, Papa. And there, she's got something that she presents to me. She shows me very great respect. She kind of comes up like this, and she's got something in her hands, and she's wanting me to have it. And so, this is what she gave me, right here. It is a pack of golden, spicy brown mustard. A little less expensive than the gift I gave her, but it became clear to me that because I had given something to her, she felt the need to give something back, whatever it was. Now, I don't know what attracted her to this particular mustard. It is kind of neat. It's got gold, it's got red on there. It's kind of neat, flashy. Maybe she just likes mustard. I don't know. Yeah, she didn't anoint my feet with it, but it was such a precious moment to me. That's why I've kept this pack of mustard. And it has an honored place in my house, and I take it wherever I talk about this incident. But it was a beautiful moment. Not because of the intrinsic worth. She was too young to know what it was worth. But she thought it was worth something special to her. And she gave it to me. And that's what these gifts are all about. It's not about the intrinsic worth. It's about what it's worth to us. And the gifts that we give Jesus can take many, many forms. Something else about this kind of gift is that it's often misunderstood by people. You ever had somebody talk about a great gift? Man, you overdid it. You shouldn't have. And sometimes great gifts are misunderstood. When someone loves greatly and someone gives greatly, there'll always be someone who will ridicule it. Judas didn't like it, and his outrage spread to the other disciples. Now the text tells us why Judas didn't like it. He was skimming off the top of the treasury. What an interesting character Judas is for us. The fact that he was made the treasurer shows that originally he was trusted by Jesus and the rest of the disciples. But he doesn't like it for that reason. But the rest of the disciples thought, well, this could have, we could have given a lot to the poor. But the fact that she gave a nice gift doesn't mean they can't also give to the poor. There's nothing that's going to stop them from it. But I don't know, maybe it's just Jesus erasing her embarrassment with praise. Maybe that's what it was. Jesus figures this was a nice gesture. I'm not going to let these guys put it down, and he praises her for it. And that quickly, she goes from joy to embarrassment and back to joy. It's certainly true that this gift did one thing. It nourished Jesus' heart. Jesus was facing his impending death, and he knew it. Now, even though Jesus is the Son of God, it doesn't mean that going to a cross is a thing anyone would want to do. The Bible says, for the joy set before him, Jesus endured the cross. I've tried to figure out what that joy was, and I've come to the conclusion the joy that was set before him was the joy of saving us. It was the joy that set before him that allowed him to endure the cross. But it still wasn't a pleasant thing to do. Remember the night before, he's struggling with it. He prays, let this cup pass from me. And in that moment, thinking about what's going to happen in a few days, having someone show him this level of love, it was worth it. It was worth it. It's good to give to the poor, but it's also good to express our love for Jesus Christ. And he simply received this gift, praised her for it, and told the disciples to hush up. That's kind of the way it worked out. But I think about what Mary would have us learn from all this. What would Mary have us to know about all of this? Maybe Mary is saying, it's a natural thing when someone is given greatly to you, for you to give greatly back in return. It wasn't just Mary's extravagant love we're talking about. It's Jesus' extravagant love for us. He has done so much for us. I don't want to discount for a moment that there are many sorrows and disappointments in this life. I understand that. I've experienced it. You've experienced it. But if we compare that to the extravagant gifts we've received in other areas, it just doesn't. The gifts are so much greater than the difficulties that we've had. Let me give you a couple of examples. Think of the stars. I think it was the philosopher Emerson that talked about how much would you pay to see one night sky full of stars. And yet we get them every night. We've kind of made that a problem now with all the light we have in the world today. You've got to go out in the country to see how really brilliant the stars are. I don't know if there's any kind of thing out there we call life or not. I don't know. I mean, it's a big universe. I don't know. But right now, we only have proof that there's life here. That's all we found. Wouldn't it be interesting if all those wonders out there were for us, made for us to enjoy, to experience the beauty of it all? All I know is there's a lot of them out there, a lot of stars out there. Think about flowers. It could have been just one color flower. But now you think about all the bouquets you see, not only different colors, but all the different kinds of flowers there are, God has given extravagantly. Think of all the food that we eat that comes from all over the world, all the different varieties. If we go into the average grocery store and think of all those different varieties, our planet produces so much more than we can even consume, that often we throw it away. And yet, it didn't have to be that way. God could have said you're all going to eat manna the rest of your life, but He gave us much more than that. I think of fish. Once had an aquarium when I was younger. Think of all the varieties of fish. Sizes. Some of them are kind of scary looking. Some look like little clowns. All different colors. It's amazing to watch them. And yet God could have just made one beige fish. That would have been sufficient. But instead we have all this variety. This planet is teeming with abundant gifts from God. But moving to a more important concept. How about grace? How about the grace of God? Jesus poured out at the cross His own lifeblood so that we could be cleansed from all our sins. All of them. As I think about that, I sometimes think about how many sins that would be. Now, I'm just going to imagine for a moment, I'm going to compare a sin maybe to traffic ticket. Now, parking ticket. Let's call it parking ticket. Now, people don't consider parking tickets like a big thing, so a lot of people don't think their sins are very big, but let's just imagine that our sins are nothing more than parking tickets. So how many sins a day do I commit? Well, let's say I commit 3 a day, and that's a conservative number. I'm sure it's much more than that, but let's just say 3 a day. So then I take that 3 a day, and I multiply that times how many days there are in a year, and I multiply that times how many years I've been alive, and it becomes a huge stinking mess of parking tickets. And I'm pretty sure the government would get concerned about that many parking tickets that were unpaid. So even if our sins were just that, it would be enormous. Multiply that times everybody in this room. Multiply that times everybody in your town, and so on and so forth. But the fact is, for some of us, what we've done is far worse than a parking ticket. And yet, that's forgiven too. Every single bit of it's been forgiven because of the sacrifice of Jesus. That is extravagant love. It's become kind of a mission of mine to remind people to balance two things about God. Yes, the Bible says God is love, but it also says He's a God of wrath. And it was our friend Dr. Cottrell that helped me understand this. He said, it's a God of wrath who loves you. I mean, if grace was given by somebody who didn't care whether you sinned or not, it would be no big deal. It was like a Santa Claus God, right? But it is the living God who is capable of being angry when it's appropriate, capable of being wrathful when it's appropriate, and yet it is that God who decided to be gracious to us. That makes grace all the sweeter to know that. So maybe what Mary's picture is a picture of God's love for us. Interestingly, Jesus saved His indignation for Judas rather than Mary. Praises Mary and tells Judas he doesn't know what he's talking about. And Jesus said we would always remember her. Well, we're talking about her today. So what can we learn from you, Mary? What do you want us to know as we see you giving something valuable back to Jesus for what you've received? So I want to ask you a question. I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm not going to ask you to answer. I just want you to think about the first thing that comes into your mind when I ask this question. What is your most prized possession? Now, I don't know what came up in your mind. Maybe you thought about your house, car, family, something in your realm of your hobby or whatever. And those may be valuable, but I'm not sure they're your most prized possession. Whatever it is you decide is your most prized possession. Maybe that's your offering. Maybe that's what you're supposed to give Jesus like Mary did. You might say, well, you know, I've committed too many sins. I'm not worth much. But one of the great things about God is that not only does He forgive our mistakes, He uses us in spite of our mistakes, and sometimes He uses our mistakes to help others. That's a beautiful thing, to be forgiven, to be given more work to do, and even to have that mistake used and sanctified by God. Maybe you think, I don't have a great many talents. Well, you probably have more talents than you think, but even if you only had one, maybe that's the one you give. But ultimately, I would like to suggest the most valuable possession you have is you, yourself. Whatever that means, it's you. You're the most valuable thing you have. Maybe that means that your life is an alabaster box that should be broken and poured out at Jesus' feet. Several years ago now, I learned this song, and I'd like to offer it today as I close. It's kind of a prayer. Let these lyrics be our prayer today. Broken and spilled out just for love of you, Jesus. My most precious treasure, lavished on Thee. Broken and spilled out and poured at Your feet, in sweet abandon, let me be spilled out and used up for Thee. Amen.